for there's no need for special kosher supervision for coffee, unflavored coffee, tea, dried fruit without other ingredients, or plain nuts. Yeah.
So there is no need, I can buy it anywhere.
Yes. And, the thing to be careful if it's like with sugar or honey coated or whatever, then you have to be careful. If it's just plain, doesn't have to be.
And instant coffee, just plain instant coffee.
Instant coffee is also okay. Instant coffee is also fine. If it's flavored, then it's
it's just plain instant. There's some brand, like some Polish brand.
Yeah, it's fine. So just instant coffee, that's fine.
Kosher.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
That's fine. For Passover, it needs to be special supervised. Passover, it's a little stricter, and especially decaf has to be. Sorry, it's new to mention. Okay.
Okay, so outside of Passover, it's fine, and only for Passover, it's okay. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll show you. I mean, we're Karen. Here's you can see sort of the syllabus.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
We are now all the way on the last page on Roman numeral 6. Okay, so it's been a while. So hopefully, if you stick around, we'll start again with again. Where are you from? Are you?
Where in Chicago, in the city, or
I don't know, a little bit like a 30 seconds. Who are you? Welcome. Yeah, we should introduce yourself.
I'm Karen Davis. I live in the city. I live in Duluth. I'm in grad school.
Where?
UIC.
Great. Studying what?
Neuroscience. So yeah.
Thank you. Okay, that's great. Maybe we'll introduce yourselves.
We introduced her. My name is Anna. I'm converting.
You all met? Okay, great. So I'm David. Fine. So I'm the teacher. Okay. Okay, Roman numeral 6, blessings. Okay, so let's we can have some text to look at. So one of the there's sort of a lot to say about this. We sort of the Talmud informs us. The Torah actually. The Torah itself says in the book of Deuteronomy, "You shall eat and be satisfied, and then you shall bless the Lord your God for the good land that He's given you." So there seems to be a Torah mitzvah. The Torah itself gives us an obligation to recite some sort of blessing, some sort of acknowledgement of God after we have eaten a meal. This is understood by the rabbis to be, a mitzvah, a biblical mitzvah to recite some sort of bracha following meals. When the Torah says "V'achalta v'savata," you eat and be satisfied. So you have to be actually full in order for the Torah obligation to kick in. But rabbinically, if you eat anything, not anything, but like any, sort of more than just a minimal quantity, there's an obligation to recite Birkat HaMazon, the grace after meals. Grace after meals is recited after meals with bread. In the ancient world, bread was not just like part of your meal; it was like it was your plate and your silverware. Also, you were like kovei suda. You would like establish your meal with bread. Meaning you would eat. There would be like some food item in a big pot, and we use bread to like dip in and eat it. And that was a major way in which eating was done. So bread was like a formidable part of any serious meal. And so the Jewish law establishes a meal with bread as a significant meal that upon which we recite Birkat HaMazon, the grace after meals, when the meal is over. There's also a shorter blessing that we recite after eating any of the 7 species of plant that the land of Israel is praised for. The book of Deuteronomy also praises the land of Israel in this very poetic, beautiful verse that speaks of 7 different species, a land of I'm not going to list them all now, but wheat and oats and dates and figs and pomegranates and olives and grapes. 7, okay? 7 species. And these 7, that's not the right order, but 7 species of like bounty. So after eating any of those 7 types of food, there's a special bracha, a special blessing that we say. And there's a shorter one, like very short bracha, very short blessing we say after eating other foods. This is all sort of developed in the Talmud, and I think it's important. In addition, the rabbis figured out, or sort of derived, that just as there's an obligation to say a bracha after we eat, so too there's an obligation to say a bracha before we eat. And this ends up being understood to be, it's called Me'ila. It is, when there was the temple, if you were, when the temple stood in Jerusalem, if you were misappropriate things that belonged to the temple for your own personal use, that was a sin that was called Me'ila. And that same sin is what the rabbis sort of compare someone who benefits from the world without saying a bracha first. So some of the world, like, we don't have right to the world. The world is, God made the world, and the bracha, saying that blessing, that acknowledgement of God and God's creation, is what gives us rights to kind of take a little piece of the world and use it for ourselves. So we're allowed to enjoy the world, we're allowed to use the world, but the blessing is that acknowledgement of God's creation, which gives us a right to enjoy it and benefit from it. So let's take a look and see what we're talking about, okay? Again, I don't know how familiar this may be to some of you or not, but if you look at page 59, here you have, right, the blessing after the meal. So, paragraph 1 is only said on Shabbat and holiday meals or special occasions. Before we recite these blessings, we recite Psalms. So we Shir HaMa'alot, it's one of the Psalms, and it's usually sung, and this would be at a holiday meal or at a Sabbath meal, any sort of a wedding meal, any sort of meal at a festive occasion. But it's sort of a preface to the actual grace. Okay? Next page, paragraph 2. Paragraph 2 is something called the Zimun. Paragraph 2 is a formal introduction to Birkat HaMazon, to the grace after meals. It's sort of a blessing for the blessing. When there's a group that eats together, one of the members of that group invites the others, gentlemen, let's recite the grace after meals now. And they say, okay, indeed you will. And that's basically what what paragraph 2 is. If the group that sort of forms this group, it's either 3 men or 3 women, but men and women don't count together for this for these purposes. In ancient times, men and women didn't eat meals together. It was seen as sort of inappropriate for men and women to eat meals together, and so you wouldn't be counting together in the same group for these purposes. Now, even though we may eat a meal together, we still count separately. So 3 men or 3 women, they can invite each other to recite grace after meals, but you'd have three of one. Okay, paragraph 3. This is the actual beginning of the Birkat HaMazon, the beginning of the grace after meals. This is the first paragraph. The first paragraph, when you can see the translation follows, the Hebrew, is a blessing that acknowledges God as the sustainer of all things. So our sustenance, our survival is traced back to God. Okay, so that's the first paragraph. It ends, Baruch Hashem hazan et hakol, provides food for all people, not just all people, all animals, right? Everyone gets their food and God provides it. That's the first blessing. Paragraph 4, this is the second blessing in Birkat HaMazon, is a blessing for the land of Israel, right? In the Torah, the land of Israel is connected to our abilities to provide food for each other, for ourselves. We got the Torah in the desert, we were fed the manna in the desert, God fed us in the desert and then led us to the border of the land of Israel. We would go and live there and farm and be able to establish a holy community where we could also feed ourselves. And so we're thanking God for eating a good meal. We're sort of acknowledging that the land that we use to feed ourselves is a gift from God. So that's what this paragraph 4 here is about. Paragraph 5 and paragraph 6 are sort of additions for holidays. Extra thanks. We give extra thanks on Hanukkah. We give extra thanks on the holiday of Purim. So that gets sort of inserted into the middle of this blessing. Paragraph 7 is the conclusion of this second bracha, the second blessing. All right, Baruch Atah Hashem, it ends, Ala Aretz Ve'al Hamazon, for the land and for food, right? So it's this blessing for the land and the connection of the land to our ability to feed ourselves. Okay, paragraph 8 begins the blessing for Jerusalem. Again, interesting, we don't, sit down and engage in this long act of prayer without acknowledging Jerusalem, and it's a prayer for the restoration of Jerusalem, which is sort of the loss of Jerusalem, the destruction of Jerusalem, the destruction of the temple is such a primal wound in the Jewish psyche that we mention it every time we sit down. And so here it is. So that's what paragraph 8 is. It's a prayer that God should have mercy on Jerusalem. And then paragraph 9 and paragraph 10 are special additions to that blessing on Shabbat and holidays. That's other special occasions. Because the celebration of Shabbat and the holidays was so intimately connected to Jerusalem and the temple in Jerusalem, the special sacrifices and service in the temple on those holy days. So when we, I'll say it this way, the Jewish table is a replacement of the temple. Right? We don't have, when the temple stood, sacrifice would be brought, we would eat the sacrifices, and this sacred eating ritual what was this sort of core part of our encounter with holiness and our marking of sacred time. So we don't have the temple anymore, but we do gather around a table. And many of this, and there's a lot of the symbolism of on our ritual meal, like we have salt on our tables when we eat our challah, the holiday bread. So because there was salt accompanying the sacrifices in the temple. The table is compared to an altar. So we're not killing anything, but we're gathering around and eating, and we're acknowledging the sacredness of the day through this collective meal. And therefore, it makes sense that sort of in this blessing where we speak about Jerusalem and pray for mercy for Jerusalem, after this holiday meal, we would also mention the holiday as well. So that's what the paragraphs 9 and 10 are about.
Have I seen people throw salt at a table? Have I seen that, or have I imagined that, or has it
Like over their shoulders?
Yeah.
Yeah, people do throw salt over the shoulders. Those people aren't necessarily Jewish, though. That's that's not a Jewish custom.
Thank you.
And then paragraph 11 is the conclusion of that blessing for Jerusalem. Okay. B'nei barachamav Yushalayim Amen. Right? Blessed is God who builds Jerusalem in His mercy. The 12th paragraph, paragraph 12. This paragraph is a blessing for God's goodness. The story the Talmud tells about this blessing is that it was added during the rebellion, the Bar Kokhba rebellion. Bar Kokhba was a Jewish general who led a rebellion against the Roman Empire in year 113. No, that was later. 133. I'm not going to look now. In the 2nd century. In the 2nd century, he led first half of the 2nd century. He led a rebellion against the Romans. Massive armies were formed. There were major battles. Bar Kokhba was defeated ultimately, and following a terrible defeat in that war, the Talmud records that the bodies of the dead Jewish soldiers didn't rot until the surviving Jewish community was able to bury them. That the fallen soldiers of Beit Tar were able to be buried intact, and that was considered a miraculous, sort of occurrence. And so this blessing is sort of thanking God for God's goodness in the context of this, that the dead were able to be buried, which is interesting because it's a fairly moderate thing to thank God for, right? In the scheme of things. It's not, we lost the battle, we lost the war, but we still are sort of taking this time to kind of acknowledge God, for this small kindness. The war this was the end of Jewish military adventures for centuries. So it was it was a turning point in Jewish history. That's the end. With paragraph 12, that's the end of the core part of Birkat HaMazon. That's it. Okay. Everything after paragraph 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 are all sort of extra bits that were added over the centuries. It's customary to say all of it after a meal, but sometimes if I am a little bit rushed, I feel a little bit stressed, and having trouble concentrating, I'll stop at the end of paragraph 12, because that's actually the end of the essential part of this blessing, and everything that comes after is just sort of extra pieces. So sometimes the whole thing is sung, especially with kids, to help them learn. The whole thing is sung. Adults generally don't sing the whole thing because it just takes a long time. It does take a long time, but it means that we eat with a little bit more consciousness, hopefully, right? That we don't just eat haphazardly, right? A meal again, if animals eat to sustain themselves, people can elevate that into something cultural by developing cuisine and sort of paying attention to what you eat in that way. And we elevate it a further level to the level of something religious when we kind of start a meal with a blessing and we end a meal with a blessing, and we're just maybe aware that the food that we're eating is also nourishing us to enable us to do good in the world and serve God, and that's sort of also part of our consciousness. So I think saying blessings before and after eating is a very powerful tool in Jewish spirituality, even if it takes a lot of words, right? As you can see, it's a lot of words. These little booklets, right? I don't know if you've encountered these before. Many Jewish homes will have booklets like this around, so that after the meal, you sort of pick one up and recite it. Often given out at weddings. Yes.
I was going to say all of them that I've ever seen have had something to do with either a wedding or a bar mitzvah.
Yeah, so usually they're given out.
As well.
You can buy them. Yeah, the bookstore will sell them.
Okay.
Yeah, or if you don't own one, you can take that one. We can spare for you, for a loyal student like you. You can take the one over if you want. Please.
But if you eat on your own, you still pray, right?
You already do it as well. Yeah. So you would have one of these, in your house. You can also,
And does it matter if you say it out loud or?
you can also have it in your pocket, like a small version. Keep in your wallet. You can have it on your phone, etc. You don't have to say it out loud. You should say it. You should say it. You can whisper it, or you can sort of say it quietly. I think if you're
or just like in your head, or you should.
in general, with all prayers and brachot, you're supposed to actually say it. So you don't have to say it loud enough for somebody else to hear you, but you say it actually like move your mouth. I think there's something about like the sort of mind. You're the neuroscientist, like the mind-body connection. Right? When you actually say something, it can be a little bit more significant than just thinking something. Is that more or less right? So,
I agree with that.
all right, good. Okay, so you're my neuroscientist. Thank you for confirming, or at least not contradicting me.
And what about drinking? If I just drink water or tea or coffee?
So we just went over that. I mean, and look, if you don't know this, you should learn this, and it'll take you a while to say it if you're not used to saying it. Eventually, you'll be able to say it a little bit more quickly. And how often do you eat bread anyway? So a few times a day, I think you take a few minutes to say it. It's worth. But with practice, you'll be able to say it. There are other blessings for other foods. So let's go to page. Where is it? Sorry. Here it is. Go to page 77. So on page 77 is the blessing following a snack. So not any snack. So this is a snack, okay? Drinking wine, which is from grapes, right? Or eating one of the fruits, olives, dates, grapes, figs, or pomegranates, or a product other than bread, or one of the grains, wheat, barley, spelt, oats, or rye, associated with the land of Israel. Okay, the land of Israel is associated with grains, and olives, dates, grapes, figs, or pomegranates. So if you eat something that's not a meal, it's not bread, but it is made from grain or olives, dates, grapes, figs, or pomegranates, you say this blessing. So what would that be? That would be, so wine, for example, it would be a muffin, it would be pasta, lasagna, that would be some olives, it would be, what else? Okay. Fig cakes, okay, whatever, okay? You would say this blessing, and it has different, it starts, so let's say, and then you say, al ha-nechiyah val kala for grain, or al ha-eitz val priya eitz for fruits, or al gefen val priya gefen for wine. If it's wine and grain products, like you had a kiddush at shul and you have a cookie and some grape juice, right? You say, al ha-nechiyah val kala vi-al ha-gefen val priya gefen. And then, after that opening line, you sort of choose your own adventure, you pick which one is appropriate, you then go on to the next section, which is the same for all snacks. You'll see it's sort of like a summary of the full Birkat Hamazon. So it hits all the themes: land of Israel and sustenance and Jerusalem. It's all there, kind of in one paragraph, and then you have the additions for special holidays as well. And then at the end, you kind of throw it. You go back to the module, right? Depending grain, fruit or wine, depending on what it is, and then you're done. So
Sorry.
No problem, no problem. So that's for,
Sorry, Rabbi. So
Yes.
you pray before and after?
yeah.
Okay.
This one is just, we're doing after, we haven't done the before brachas, we're just doing after brachas right now.
Okay.
Okay?
Because I'm
So this is-
confused.
Okay. This is the, so we saw the long, full Birkat HaMazon, the full grace after meals, which is the after bracha for a meal with bread. We just went over now is the after bracha for a snack made from grain or one of the fruits the land of Israel is praised, about which the land of Israel is praised. Olives, grapes, figs, pomegranates, dates. Okay? I think I said dates twice.
So only for this specific job?
Only for those. Not for apples, just for pomegranates and grapes, etc. Right? Okay.
This is a great meal with a granola bar.
Yeah. Now, look at the bottom of page 80. Anything else, this is the miscellaneous. Anything else that doesn't require the full Birkat HaMazon, doesn't require the full grace, and it doesn't require the small version, gets this one short blessing at the end. Baruch atah Hashem Melech Haolam, borei nefashot rabot v'chesronan al kol ma shebaratza le'achiyot behen nefesh kol chai, baruch Elohim. Okay, that's what you say for anything else. That would be water, steak, a beer, an apple, okay, an orange, a piece of cheese, okay, a sausage, okay, all of these things. Afterwards, get that short blessing. That's sort of the catch-all generic blessing. After blessing for all the foods that don't get one of the two larger ones. Again, this the short one is easy to memorize. The medium-sized one, maybe you'll memorize. Maybe you'll have a little card, keep it in your wallet. The longer one is a little bit hard to memorize, but with practice you can say it. You learn how to say it. That shouldn't be impossible. Okay, let's look at some blessings before things. So far, so good? Okay. Let's go to page 91. So this is the blessing. This is now the blessing before the various. This is the before blessings for all the various foods. Okay. They all start the same. Baruch atah Hashem Eloheinu Melech Haolam. That's the opening, right? Baruch atah Hashem Melech Haolam. That's like the opening for all brachot. And then for bread, Hamotzi Lechem min haaretz, brings forth bread from the earth. For other things made from grain that isn't bread, borei minei mizonot, cake, cereal, cookies, etc. For fruit that grows on trees, borei priya eitz. For fruits and vegetables that grow in the ground, borei priya adama. The distinction between borei priya eitz and borei priya adama is whether or not the fruit grows from a tree that has a branch that comes off from the trunk as opposed to a branch that sort of goes straight to the ground. For example, a banana is borei priya adama because the banana tree, if you've ever seen one, that the branches, there's no trunk, the branches come off, there's just the leaves that come right from the ground, from the base of the banana plant. So banana, the bracha is borei priya adama. Okay, for wine, borei priya gefen, and then for any other drinks and other foods that aren't included there is shekonia bivero. That's like the catch-all. That would be shekonia bivero on the top of page 92. That's the bracha for whiskey and for soda and for corn chips and for lollipops and for steak, okay, and for cheese. Shekonia bivero. That's the catch-all.
Is there a special one for water or water?
Water is shekonia bivero. Okay. Should we try it? Want some water? I'll do it whatever. Yeah, just a second. I got some water for people. Okay, hold on.
Where is the one for water? How about that?
I'm gonna need two. This one,
Thank you.
the pot, for all of it.
Oh, okay.
Tell me more. It was for me.
This is your first time to a class like this? Yeah? What do you think?
Okay, ready? Here we go. Okay.
So this is the very
Okay. So it's going to be, so the beginning of the bracha is on, it's not the best version of whatever, it may be easier. The beginning of the bracha is the top of page 91, and then we're going to flip to the top of page 92 for the end of the bracha, okay? Can you hold your water in your hand? Let's say it together. Okay. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol
Shahakol
nihiyeh
Nikia
bidvaro.
Bidvaro.
Right, Chaim. Okay.
And after you stop
Finish it, finish it, finish it.
Oh,
Okay. Okay, go back to page, where is it? Back to page 80. This is the after bracha. Ready? All together? Count it. The bottom of page 80.
the long one?
That sort of the paragraph from the bottom of page 80. Okay, right after food or drink not requiring either the blessing after the meal or the blessing after a snack. This sort of this one in here. Okay, we'll say Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei nefashot rabot v'chesronan al kol ma shebarata lahayot lahem nefesh kol chai Baruch Chei haolamim. Very nice. Okay, so with practice, this become, so the story, there's a movie that came out, that was filmed in Israel a few years ago, and the movie takes place amongst like religious Jews, but the actors were not religious. So there was a scene where one of the characters like picks up a pickle, says the bracha for the pickle and eats it. But like it's not the scene. The scene is he's going to talk to somebody, but he picks up a pickle that's in the plate and eats it while he's like walks into the room, picks up a pickle, eats it, and then has this conversation. That's the scene. But it was really hard for the director that they had to like reshoot the scene multiple times to get the actor to pick up the pickle, say the bracha, and eat the pickle in like in a authentically casual kind of way, because he was not familiar with reciting blessings before eating, and so he thought he'd pick up the pickle and stare at it and focus and say the bracha with a lot of spiritual focus and energy. And for people who say bracha all the time, it actually becomes something fairly casual that you don't necessarily think about. So the truth is, you really should think about it. It really should be an act of consciousness before eating. But if you say them all day, it does become somewhat routine. That is the, I guess that's the reward and that's the risk. The reward is it becomes easy, it becomes second nature, it becomes something that you do without necessarily thinking about it. The negative is maybe you don't think about it, then you kind of lose some of the spiritual power of actually saying this acknowledgement and thanks before eating. So I'd say maybe you want to be fluent, you want to be comfortable with them, you want to know them, what bracha for which food, but still retain like sort of an actual awareness of what you're saying and that it means something. There are actually little booklets. They used to be more popular, like lists of foods and what bracha, match those foods, for things that are a little bit complicated to figure out. I think it's all online now, so that those booklets are less but if there's a food that you are unfamiliar with or don't know what the bracha would be for whatever reason, if you Google like mushroom bracha, or whatever, chicken pot pie bracha, meatloaf bracha, whatever it might be, you can find, Google will get you to these, reliable sources. I mean, not everything online obviously is reliable, but you can find some reliable sources, some of these very good bracha guides. If you have any difficulty or if there's something you're curious about, you can send me an email, and I'll be happy to give you a link of some good websites that provide this information.
What do you say when it's kind of like a combined thing? Like you were saying chicken pot pie.
Yeah. So that's
more
so
than one
the
component.
combined thing depends on it's a little complicated. If it's clear that one of the items is the more important one, you would say the bracha on that one and not the secondary thing. So that's a good example. I think if you have like a muffin that has raisins in it, you would say the bracha on the muffin, not the raisin. Okay. But if it's like a real kind of mixture where it's not so obvious, maybe it would be easiest just to like take out, let's say it's Waldorf salad, like apple and lettuce. So the apple is Bray Priya 8, the lettuce is Bray Priya Dama. Maybe it's equal amount apple and lettuce in this particular Waldorf salad. So which one? So pick up an apple, say Bray Priya 8, pick up a piece of lettuce, say Bray Priya Dama, and then enjoy your salad. Do it that way. And with that, the apple and the lettuce both have the same after bracha, which is the short Borei Nefashot that we just said. So for things like that, the websites are helpful. If you're a little bit unsure, some of these websites are very helpful for figuring that information. Basically, it's sort of what the more important thing is. If you can't identify more important things, so maybe you would say both. Now, if it's a meal with bread, you say Hamotzi Lechem and Haaretz, the bracha for bread at the beginning of the meal, and then you say no other brachot for the rest of the meal. Because that one bracha covers you for the entire meal. Then you say Birkat HaMazon, the full grace after at the end, and you're covered. So if you just eat at mealtime, you don't have to know anything. Then you only know like one bracha before, and the Birkat HaMazon after, and you're done. So that's a little bit easier. And so that's another thing. If it's a complicated, hybrid, food item with different things, if you eat it with a meal with bread, you just say Hamotzi at the beginning of the meal, and then no other brachot for the rest of the meal.
Is it muffin bread?
Muffin is not bread. Muffin is doesn't look like bread, doesn't really taste like bread. You eat it as a snack. And pizza is an interesting case. Pizza really depends how you eat it. If you eat pizza as like a snack food, like one slice, for me, one slice of pizza, that's not a meal. That's like, I'm still hungry after one slice of pizza. So I have one slice, I'll say mizonot, the bracha for non-meal grain derivatives. But if I eat two slices of pizza, I'll say hamotzi. And I'll add birkat hamazon afterwards, because that's two slices, that's already a meal. Some people are strict and they would say hamotzi even for one slice. I once saw a bumper sticker that said, I wash for one slice. So another thing for hamotzi, for the bracha, we also wash our hands before any meal with bread, we also wash our hands before. And this is sort of a vestigial custom, practice of ancient times when when the temple existed. There was a whole rubric of purity laws that governed access to the temple and access to sacred things, sacred foods. And a class of sort of the rabbinic elite developed a custom of also maintaining purity even for non-sacred foods. And so, in sort of homage to that practice, we wash our hands before eating bread, even though the bread it's not any of the different ways in Jewish Judaism where bread could be sanctified in an essential way.
And when you say washing hands, just like regular way, or the same way as
The
like
ritual.
Shabbat, like
Just
ritual?
exactly, like with the cup and 1, 2, 1, 2, and then the bracha for washing hand washing.
1, 2, 3.
Some people do 1, 2, 3, some people do 1, 2. I do 1, 2. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. That's fine. So that's not a Shabbat hand washing. That's a hand washing before eating bread. So whenever you're going to eat bread, you're going to wash your hands with a cup. Say the
With a
bracha.
prayer.
Say the bracha for washing hands. Say the bracha for the bread, and you eat your meal. Right. So in Judaism, eating is not a casual. You gotta think about it. You gotta find some time, which I think it's probably healthy to eat that way. And I think it kind of can lead to a more healthy awareness of where food comes from, the importance of food, and gratitude towards God that we have the health and the ability to do these things.
So is there a standard for 1, 2, 3 or 1, 2 or?
There's different practices. They're both pretty common. Right? Okay, there are other blessings to discuss. I want to pause here because my wife is the mikveh attendant tonight, so I have to go home so she can get back here. So apologies, I'm sorry we started late. It took us a long time to gather a minyan. Davening went late today as well.
Will we do anything with these songs in the back at some future class?
You want to speak? I'm happy to. Want to sing some songs?
No, I don't want to sing some songs, but I'd like to know something about why they're included.
Oh,
and what
because
kinds of songs
so these
they
are songs that you would sing, like these are all religious songs. These are like little snippets of prayers or snippets of liturgy. All of these in the last 30 years, somebody has recorded some melody with these lyrics. Like sort of a lot of religious music is taking old lyrics and giving it like sort of new melodies. Some of these have old melodies, but you know, and you'd sing these at a wedding, or at a Shabbat meal even. So the book also has like the classic Zmirot. There are some classic, like page 46, page 47, page 48, page 30. There's some classic Zmirot, classic poems for Shabbat, which are often sung at Sabbath meals. And you can see these are complicated pieces of poetry that were composed in the Middle Ages. They all have new melodies and old melodies, and you make up melodies, and really a lot of fun. Really, I think if you like singing, I love singing. I love singing these at Shabbat meals. In addition, these songs at the end are like a little shorter, more casual. Again, most of these have been published, released as songs by Jewish musicians in the last 30, 40 years. And you would also sing these at a Shabbat meal, but a little bit less formal, right? Or at a wedding, you would dance to some of these songs. So I know melodies. I could sing many of these songs at the back. So that's why it's printed here. You could gather around, listen. You could take this book, gather around on a Friday night, and so we could say, okay, we'll sing now, song 77. Okay, now we'll sing song 32, whatever. So that's what that's for. Okay, thank you so much. We have a couple of events coming in the few weeks, like a lot of Passover preparation stuff. I'm not exactly sure when we'll next meet, because next Tuesday we have this event for the JUF, which I encourage you to attend. Then after that, we're already getting into Passover, and then we have Passover, so we may be a while till this class meets, but please look at the bulletin, and if you're on you should ask to be on the shul email list if you're not already, so you'll get notified about things that happen, and feel free
I
to...
tried